I sat in the driveway of my childhood home, the engine of my $135 0 Porsche 911 Turbo S purring with a low, predatory hum that seemed to vibrate through the very pavement my parents had once told me I'd never be successful enough to own. I looked at the front door, the same peeling white paint I remembered from the day I packed my bags 3 years ago, and I wondered if they'd even recognize the person sitting behind the wheel. They hadn't seen me since they decided my wedding wasn't worth the flight, and they certainly hadn't seen me since I became the person who could drop 6 figures on a car without blinking. Was I wrong for showing up just to rub their noses in the life they chose to walk away from? I really want you to think about that as I tell you this, because honestly, looking at that house, I wasn't sure if I was there for closure or for a very expensive version of "I told you so." You tell me if you would have done the same thing after being treated like the family's biggest disappointment for 25 years. To understand why I was sitting there, idling a supercar in a middle-class suburb, you have to understand my family. I was always the other child. My brother, Marcus, was the golden boy. He was the high school quarterback, the one who went to the prestigious state university on a partial scholarship, and the one my parents, Linda and Robert, poured every cent and every ounce of emotional energy into. I was the quiet one, the one who liked computers and spent my weekends learning how to code instead of hitting the gym. My parents didn't understand it, so they dismissed it. They'd brag to the neighbors about Marcus's touchdowns while I sat at the dinner table like a ghost. When I graduated high school, there was no party. When I got into a decent college, they told me they couldn't help with tuition because they were saving up to help Marcus buy his first house after he graduated. I worked 3 jobs, took out loans, and barely slept for 4 years, all while watching them fly across the country to watch Marcus play ball. The resentment didn't happen overnight. It was a slow burn, a steady accumulation of being told, in 1,000 tiny ways, that I just didn't matter as much. The breaking point, or so I thought at the time, was my wedding. I met Sarah in my junior year. She was everything my parents weren't supportive, brilliant, and she saw the potential in the tech startup I was building in my dorm room. By the time I was 26, the company was actually gaining traction. I wasn't rich yet, but I was doing well. When I proposed to Sarah, I thought it might be the bridge to finally earn my parents' respect. I called them, excited, telling them we were getting married in a beautiful coastal town. I offered to pay for their flights and their hotel. I just wanted them there. My mother's response was, "Oh, that's nice, honey. We'll have to see. Marcus has his big corporate retreat that weekend, and we promised we'd watch his dogs." I thought she was joking. She wasn't. 2 weeks before the wedding, they called to say they just couldn't make the logistics work. No card, no gift, not even a FaceTime call on the day. Sarah and I got married surrounded by friends and her wonderful family, but every time I looked at the empty chairs reserved for the groom's parents, something inside me died. I stopped calling. I stopped sending holiday texts. I went completely dark, throwing every bit of my hurt and anger into my work. Then the big win happened. My startup was acquired by a major tech conglomerate. Suddenly, the kid who had to choose between a textbook and dinner had more money than he knew what to do with. I bought a house, I invested, and yes, I bought the car. The Porsche wasn't just a car to me. It was a physical manifestation of every hour I spent coding while Marcus was being praised for things that didn't matter anymore. I hadn't spoken to my parents in 3 years until I got a random Facebook notification. Marcus had lost his high-paying corporate job, his house was in foreclosure, and my parents were struggling to keep the family afloat. Suddenly, my mother was blowing up my phone. She didn't ask how Sarah was. She didn't apologize for the wedding. She just said, "We heard you're doing well in the city, and family helps family." That's when I decided to drive home. I wanted them to see exactly what they had walked away from. So that's the situation I was in, sitting in that driveway with the engine idling. I had the power to change their lives with a single check, but I also had 3 decades of being ignored fueling my anger. Before I tell you what happened when I stepped out of that car and looked my father in the eye, I want you to pause. Go down to the comments right now and tell me, would you help them, or would you let them feel the weight of their own choices? I really want to know if I'm the villain in this story or just a son who finally had enough. I turned off the engine, the silence following the Porsche's roar feeling heavier than the noise itself. I stepped out, the sunlight catching the metallic paint, making the car look like a literal diamond in the rough of their overgrown lawn. My father came out onto the porch first, squinting against the glare. He looked older, tired, and honestly, a little defeated. When he realized it was me, his face went through a kaleidoscope of emotions: shock, then a forced, greasy kind of smile. "Leo," he called out, his voice cracking, "is that you, and is that your car?" My mother followed him out, her eyes widening as she took in my tailored suit, and the vehicle that cost more than their entire mortgage. "Oh, Leo, we knew you'd come home," she cried, rushing down the steps as if the last 3 years of silence had never happened. They didn't hug me, they hovered around the car. My dad actually reached out to touch the hood before I cleared my throat, stopping him in his tracks. "It's a nice car, isn't it?" I said, my voice cold and steady. "It's amazing what you can achieve when you don't have anyone holding you back or telling you that you aren't the priority." The smile on my mother's face faltered. She started talking about how hard things had been for Marcus, how he was a victim of the economy, and how they were just so proud of me for being the stable one they could rely on. It was sickening. They didn't want me, they wanted the bank account I represented. They invited me inside, and for 30 minutes I listened to them talk about their debts, Marcus's depression, and how unfortunate it was that they missed the wedding. They claimed they had a stomach flu that week, a lie so blatant it made my ears ring. They never even asked to see photos of the wedding. They just kept pivoting back to the fact that they were 2 months behind on their bills. I let them finish. I even let them think I was going to help. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my checkbook. I saw my dad's eyes light up with a greed he couldn't hide. I wrote out a check, tore it off, and laid it face down on the coffee table. I told them that this was for every birthday they forgot, every game of mine they skipped to watch Marcus, and for the empty chairs at my wedding. Then I stood up. My mother grabbed the check and flipped it over. Her face went pale. It was a check for $0.00. In the memo line, I had written, "Payable to the parents I actually had, not the ones I wanted." I told them that the car outside was worth more than their house, and the reason I bought it was because I could. I told them that Marcus could find a job the same way I did, by working for it without a safety net. I walked out while my father was screaming about unfilial children, and my mother was sobbing about how cruel I was. As I drove away, watching them get smaller and smaller in my rear-view mirror, I didn't feel the rush of joy I expected. I felt a profound sense of relief, like a weight I'd been carrying since I was 5 years old had finally been dropped. The consequences were immediate. Marcus tried to blast me on social media, calling me a tech bro elitist, who abandoned his family, but my friends and Sarah's family, the people who were actually at my wedding, stood up for me. My parents sent me a long, guilt-tripping email a week later, which I deleted without reading. I realized that some people don't love you, they love the version of you that is useful to them. By showing up in that Porsche, I didn't just show them my wealth. I showed them that I no longer needed their validation to be whole. I'm happy now, building a life with Sarah, and that car is still in my garage. A daily reminder that the best revenge is living a life so good you don't even care if they're watching anymore. Looking back, I realize that the money was never the point. The Porsche was just a tool to get their attention long enough to tell them the truth. Sometimes you have to be the villain in someone else's story just to be the hero in your own. If you've ever been the overlooked sibling or the one told you'd never make it, know that your worth isn't defined by the people who fail to see it. Like this video if you were on my side and think my parents got exactly what they deserved. Subscribe for more stories like this, where the underdog finally gets the last laugh, and please, share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. Did I go too far, or was the $0 check the perfect ending? I'll see you all in the next story.